The Forest of Whispering Shadows? Ancient, unforgiving, a place where time itself seemed to stand still, where the air was thick with the weight of countless untold stories and forgotten secrets. The forest stood, a monolith of twisted branches and gnarled roots clawing at the earth. Each tree seemed to have a life of its own, their limbs reaching out like skeletal fingers, grasping at the sky in a silent plea for release. The ground was a tangled mess of roots and underbrush, making every step a challenge, every movement a potential misstep into the unknown. Sunlight dared not penetrate its dense canopy, leaving only an eerie, perpetual twilight. The few rays that did manage to break through were quickly swallowed by the darkness, creating an ever-present gloom that seemed to seep into the very soul of anyone who ventured within. The air was cool and damp, carrying with it the scent of decay and the faint, almost imperceptible whispers of the past. Legends whispered of souls lost within, their pleas for mercy swallowed by the rustling leaves. It was said that the forest was alive, that it could sense the presence of intruders and would do everything in its power to keep them from leaving. The whispers were constant, a soft, almost soothing murmur that belied the true danger that lay within. They spoke of lost travelers, of those who had entered the forest never to return, their voices now part of the eternal chorus of the damned. This was no ordinary woodland, but a place where fear was born and nightmares took form. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking menace, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. The forest was a living, breathing entity, feeding off the fear and despair of those who dared to enter. It was a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, where the very fabric of existence seemed to unravel, leaving only terror in its wake. It was a place of whispers, of shadows that danced just beyond sight, and an unseen evil that watched, waited, and claimed those foolish enough to enter. The shadows seemed to have a life of their own, moving and shifting in the corner of one's vision, always just out of reach. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if trying to lure the unwary deeper into the forest's embrace. And the evil, the unseen force that permeated every inch of the forest, was always there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, to claim another soul for its collection. A lone wanderer's entry. The air grew colder as she stepped across the invisible threshold, a stark contrast to the warm sunlight that bathed the world beyond the forest's edge. Her name was Anya, a young woman with fiery red hair and a spirit as untamed as the wilderness before her. She had heard the stories, dismissed them as folklore, mere campfire tales meant to frighten children. But deep down, a primal fear stirred within her, a sense of unease that intensified with every step she took into the forest's suffocating embrace. The ground bleeds. The path beneath her feet, barely discernible in the gloom, was littered with decaying leaves and the skeletal remains of long-dead trees. A coppery tang lingered in the air, the metallic scent of blood mingling with the damp earth and decaying vegetation. A chill wind rustled the leaves overhead, whispering secrets in a language she couldn't understand. The forest seemed to press in on her, a living, breathing entity that resented her intrusion. Eyes in the darkness. The first shriek pierced the silence, a high-pitched wail of pure terror that sent a shiver down Anya's spine. It was a sound devoid of any human comfort, filled with a raw, primal fear. She had never heard anything like it before, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of despair. The forest, which had been eerily quiet just moments before, now felt alive with unseen dangers. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed amplified in the oppressive darkness. That spoke of something truly horrifying. She froze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frantic bird desperate for escape. From the corner of her eye, she caught a flicker of movement in the dense undergrowth. A pair of eyes, glowing with an unnatural intensity, stared back at her, their gaze filled with an icy malice. Anya's breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The eyes were unlike anything she had ever encountered, glowing with a malevolent light that seemed to pierce through the darkness, stared back at her, their gaze filled with an icy malice. She could feel the weight of their stare, as if they were probing into her very soul. The forest around her seemed to close in, the trees looming like silent sentinels. Anya's mind raced, trying to recall any stories or legends that might explain the presence of these eyes. But nothing came to mind, only a growing sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm her. That sent shivers down her spine. She knew she had to move to get away from whatever was watching her, but her legs felt like lead. The fear was paralyzing, rooting her to the spot. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and forced her legs to move. Each step felt like an eternity, the eyes never leaving her, tracking her every movement. Anya's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more terrifying than the last. She had to get out of the forest to find safety, but the way out seemed impossibly far. The eyes in the darkness were a constant reminder of the danger she was in, and she knew she couldn't afford to let her guard down for even a moment. A soulful shriek pierced the night, a sound so haunting it seemed to come from the very depths of despair. Anya stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. The cold air stung her lungs, each exhale visible in the frigid night. She could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on her, suffocating and relentless. The eyes vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving her to question her sanity. Were they real, or just a figment of her terrified imagination? She couldn't be sure, but the fear was all too real. But the shriek echoed in her ears, a chilling reminder that she was not alone in this cursed place. The sound seemed to reverberate through the trees, bouncing off the twisted branches and filling the air with an eerie resonance. Fear, sharp and cold, gripped her heart. It was a primal fear, one that spoke to the deepest parts of her being. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a painful reminder of her vulnerability. She had to get out, to escape the suffocating darkness that pressed in on her from all sides. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. She could feel the forest closing in on her, its malevolent presence almost tangible. But which way was out? The forest was a labyrinth, each path looking the same as the last. She turned in circles, her sense of direction lost in the overwhelming darkness. The path behind her seemed to twist and turn, leading her further into the heart of the forest's malevolent embrace. It was as if the forest itself was alive, guiding her deeper into its clutches, away from any hope of escape. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to ensnare her. She could feel the weight of their gaze, an oppressive force that made her skin crawl. Anya's mind raced, searching for a way out, but every step seemed to take her further from safety. The forest was a maze, and she was its unwilling captive. The hunt begins. A twig snapped underfoot. Anya spun around, her senses on high alert. The forest held its breath, the silence amplifying her fear. Then she heard it, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. Panic surged through her. She had to run, to escape the unseen terror that hunted her. But her legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot by a fear so profound it bordered on paralysis. Trapped in terror. A low growl, guttural and menacing, resonated from the shadows, circling her, tightening the noose of fear that bound her. Anya whipped her head back and forth, desperately seeking the source of the terrifying sound. But the forest held its secrets close. She was trapped, caught in a macabre game of cat and mouse with an entity she couldn't even see. Her mind raced, searching for a way out, for a weapon to defend herself, but the forest offered no solace, only the promise of a gruesome end. A faint light flickered through the trees ahead, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. With renewed determination, Anya surged forward, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Could it be civilization, a way out of this nightmare? As she drew closer, the light resolved itself into a small, dilapidated cabin, its windows dark and lifeless. Relief warred with trepidation as she approached cautiously, her hand hovering over the rusty doorknob. The door creaked open, revealing a scene of utter desolation. The cabin's interior was in ruins, its furniture overturned and decayed, covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. The air was heavy with the stench of death and decay, and a palpable sense of evil permeated the very walls. Anya's heart sank. This was no sanctuary, but another layer of her living nightmare. The light she had seen, a cruel trick, a lure to draw her deeper into the forest's clutches. Despair washed over her, cold and absolute. A cold hand, its touch like ice, clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. Anya thrashed against the unseen assailant, her terror reaching a fever pitch. But her struggles were futile against the overwhelming strength of her captor. She caught one last glimpse of the outside world, the faint light of the moon filtering through the trees, before she was dragged back into the suffocating darkness, another victim claimed by the haunted forest. Anya's fate awaits you in the haunted forest. Will you escape the horrors that lurk within, or will you become another lost soul, your screams swallowed by the whispering trees? Subscribe now and journey